Welcome to FearBound Stories. Please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now let's begin. The snow started falling just after sunset, slow and steady, thick enough to quiet the entire neighborhood. Christmas lights glowed softly along rooftops, their colors muted by the white blanket settling over everything. The street was peaceful. Too peaceful. Ethan Miller pulled his coat tighter as he stepped out of his car and looked up at his childhood home. He hadn't been back in years, not since his mother passed away, not since the house stopped feeling like a place people lived. Tonight was Christmas Eve. The porch light flickered as he walked up the steps. The wood creaked under his boots, the sound loud in the silence. He paused for a moment, listening. Wind brushed against the trees. Somewhere far away, a dog barked. Nothing else. Inside, the house was cold. Not abandoned cold. Not broken heating cold. This was the kind of cold that lingered in walls, in furniture, in memories. Ethan set his bag down and turned on a lamp. The yellow light spread weakly across the living room, revealing furniture covered in white sheets and a thin layer of dust on everything. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, unplugged, decorated, waiting. Ethan frowned. He was certain he'd packed it away years ago. He told himself it was just his memory playing tricks on him. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. 9:41 p.m. He moved through the house slowly, room by room, checking locks, closing curtains. Every step echoed longer than it should have. The hallway felt narrower than he remembered, the shadows deeper. Then he heard it. A sound from outside. Crunch. Footsteps in snow. Ethan froze near the front door. He listened carefully, holding his breath. Another crunch followed. Slow, heavy, purposeful. Someone was on the porch. He stepped closer to the door and peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just the porch, snow drifting, empty. He let out a nervous breath and turned away. Knock. 3 slow knocks struck the door behind him. Ethan spun around, heart hammering. The knocking wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, it was careful, almost polite. He swallowed and called out, "Hello?" No response. Another knock. Same rhythm. Same patience. Ethan approached the door again and looked through the peephole. A figure stood on the porch, tall, wrapped in a dark winter coat, head slightly lowered. Snow clung to the shoulders and hood, but something about the way the figure stood made Ethan uneasy. Too still, too deliberate. "Can I help you?" Ethan asked. The figure lifted its head. Ethan's stomach dropped. It looked like his father. Not older, not younger. Exactly as he remembered him the night he died. Same face, same eyes, same faint scar above the eyebrow. Ethan staggered back from the door. No, that's not possible. His father had frozen to death 20 years ago, during a storm just like this one. He'd gone outside to clear the driveway and never came back in. The figure outside raised a hand and knocked again. Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Dad." The porch light flickered. The figure leaned closer to the door, close enough that Ethan could see frost forming along the edges of the glass. Then it spoke. "Ethan," the voice said softly. "It was wrong. Too slow. Too empty. Like sound traveling through ice. You left me out here." Ethan backed away, shaking his head. "I was a kid. I didn't know. I thought you'd come back inside." The figure's mouth stretched into something that almost resembled a smile. "You locked the door." Ethan's memories crashed back all at once. His mother screaming for him not to open it, the pounding outside, the wind, the fear. He'd listened. He'd stayed inside. The knocking grew louder. The temperature inside the house dropped instantly, Frost crept along the doorframe, crawling across the wood like living veins. The lights flickered violently. Ethan ran. He rushed into the living room, grabbing his phone. No signal. The battery drained rapidly, dropping percentage by percentage. The knocking turned into pounding. The front door shook with every hit. Snow began blowing in through the cracks. The Christmas tree lights flickered on by themselves, glowing softly. Then the pounding stopped. Silence. Ethan stood frozen, chest heaving. A new sound came from the hallway. Footsteps. Inside the house. Slow, heavy, wet. Ethan turned just in time to see a figure standing at the end of the hallway, partially illuminated by the tree lights. His father's face was closer now, clearer. But the eyes were wrong. Clouded, icy, reflecting light like glass. "You let me freeze," it said. Ethan backed away until his legs hit the couch. I'm so sorry." The figure took one step forward. Frost spread across the walls behind it. The hallway lights burst, plunging the house into dim, flickering shadows. "You can make it right," it whispered. The front door creaked open on its own. Cold wind screamed into the house, carrying snow and darkness with it. The figure turned slightly, gesturing toward the open door. "Come outside." Ethan shook his head violently. "No." The figure's face twisted, jaw cracking unnaturally wide. "You don't get to stay warm this time." The last thing the neighbors heard that night was the sound of the wind howling through an open door. In the morning, police found the house empty. The front door stood wide open. The Christmas tree still glowed softly. And in the snow outside, 2 sets of footprints led away from the house. None of them came back. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. The town of Birch Hollow only decorated one place for Christmas: the church. Every December, strings of warm yellow lights were wrapped around its old wooden beams. A wreath was hung on the front door. Candles glowed behind the stained glass windows every evening after sunset. The rest of the town stayed dark. No lights in yards. No decorations in windows. No Christmas trees visible from the road. People who passed through Birch Hollow always noticed it. They assumed the town was poor, or deeply religious, or simply strange. They never stayed long enough to ask why. Ethan Mercer arrived on December 22nd, just before sunset. His car had broken down miles outside town, and the tow truck driver dropped him off at the only open place nearby, a small roadside inn across from the church. As Ethan checked in, the innkeeper avoided eye contact. "You'll hear the bells tonight," the man said quietly, sliding the room key across the counter. Ethan frowned. "Church bells?" The innkeeper hesitated. "If you hear them, don't follow." Ethan laughed awkwardly, assuming it was a joke. That night, snow began falling heavily. Thick, slow flakes blanketed the town, muting sound and swallowing the narrow streets. From his room window, Ethan could see the church clearly. Its lights glowed warmly against the darkness, the only bright thing for miles. At exactly 11:58 p.m., the bells rang. Not loud, not celebratory, slow, heavy, deliberate. One bell, then another, then another. Ethan checked his phone. December 23rd had just begun. He watched as the church doors slowly opened. Warm light spilled onto the snow-covered steps, and people began to emerge. They walked out one by one, forming a line down the steps and into the street. Men, women, children, all dressed in winter coats, scarves, and hats from different eras. Some looked modern, others looked decades out of place. They didn't speak. They didn't look at each other. They walked in silence toward the forest at the edge of town. Ethan's stomach tightened. He grabbed his jacket and stepped outside, drawn by something he couldn't explain. The cold bit instantly, but the sound of the bells pulled him forward like a slow heartbeat. As he followed at a distance, he noticed something wrong. None of them left footprints. The snow remained untouched beneath their feet. The bells stopped. The forest swallowed the procession. Ethan stood frozen at the tree line, heart pounding, breath fogging thick in the air. He told himself it was a dream. Exhaustion, stress, cold. Then a voice whispered from behind him, "You shouldn't be outside." Ethan spun around. The innkeeper stood a few feet away, face pale, eyes wide. "What was that?" Ethan demanded. "Who were those people?" The man swallowed. "They're the ones who stayed." Before Ethan could ask more, the bells rang again once. A single note. The innkeeper grabbed Ethan's arm. "Come inside, now." They locked the door behind them. The innkeeper poured 2 drinks with shaking hands. "Every Christmas," he said quietly, "the church opens, and those who didn't leave, walk." Ethan stared at him. "Didn't leave when?" "When they should have." The man explained. Years ago, during a brutal Christmas storm, travelers were stranded in Birch Hollow. The church opened its doors, offering warmth, food, and shelter. But by morning, the storm was gone, and so were the travelers. No bodies, no tracks, no explanation. After that, people learned, if you're here before Christmas, you leave. If you arrive after, you don't follow the bells. Ethan barely slept. At 11:58 p.m. on Christmas Eve, the bells rang again, this time closer. From inside the inn, Ethan sat up in bed, heart racing. The sound came from the hallway. Slow footsteps followed, stopping outside his door. Then a knock. 3 soft taps. A voice whispered through the wood, calm, inviting, wrong. "The church is warm tonight." Ethan held his breath, refusing to move. The knob turned slowly. Ice crept across the doorframe. The voice spoke again. "Everyone belongs somewhere on Christmas." The bells rang once more. Then silence. Morning came. Snow melted. Ethan fled the town at first light. When he looked back one last time, the church stood dark and empty, except for one thing. A new candle burned in the window. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. The church on Frost Mill Road only held one Christmas service a year, midnight mass. It was an old stone building tucked between pine trees, far enough from town that phone signals faded as you approached. Locals said it had been there longer than the road itself, and some claimed the cemetery behind it was fuller than the church had ever been. Ethan had never planned on going. He wasn't religious and he hadn't been home for Christmas in years. But when his car broke down 20 minutes outside town and the snowstorm rolled in thick and sudden, the church lights were the only ones he could see through the white haze. Warm yellow light spilled from the stained glass windows. The bells were ringing. He trudged toward the entrance, boots crunching through fresh snow, breath heavy in the freezing air. The bells stopped the moment he reached the door. Silence. Then the door creaked open on its own. Inside, the church was warm. Too warm. Candlelight flickered along stone walls, illuminating rows of wooden pews already filled with people, all of them facing forward. A choir hummed softly at the front, voices low and steady, singing a Christmas hymn Ethan didn't recognize. The melody felt stretched, wrong, as if notes were being held longer than they should. He slipped into an empty pew near the back. No one turned to look at him. Every face stared ahead. At the altar, the priest stood beneath a large wooden cross, hands folded, head bowed. His robes were old-fashioned, heavy, stitched with gold thread dulled by age. Ethan noticed something strange as the hymn continued. No one was breathing. No rising chests. No shifting. No coughing. Just stillness. The hymn ended all at once. The priest lifted his head. "Welcome," he said, voice echoing unnaturally. "We are glad you could join us tonight." His eyes moved slowly, scanning the pews. Then they stopped, locked onto Ethan. The priest smiled. "We don't often receive new guests." A ripple of quiet murmurs passed through the congregation, like wind through dry leaves. Ethan swallowed. My car broke down," he said quietly, the sound of his own voice feeling intrusive. "I just needed to wait out the storm." The priest nodded. "Of course," he said. "Everyone comes here for shelter." The candles flickered. The priest raised his hands. "Let us begin." The service continued, but nothing felt right. The prayers were unfamiliar. The words twisted slightly as they were spoken, stretched and distorted like echoes in a tunnel. Ethan glanced at the people around him. Their skin was pale, gray, almost translucent in the candlelight. Their eyes reflected the flames like glass. A woman beside him slowly turned her head. Her smile was wide, too wide. "You're early," she whispered. "Early for what?" Ethan asked. Her lips trembled. "For Christmas," she replied. The priest's voice boomed again. "Please stand." Everyone rose in perfect unison. Ethan hesitated, then stood. The priest stepped down from the altar and began walking the aisle, boots echoing heavily on stone. As he passed each pew, people bowed their heads. When he reached Ethan, he stopped. Up close, the priest's face looked wrong. The skin around his eyes was sunken, stretched tight like parchment. His breath smelled faintly of earth and cold stone. "You don't belong to this year," the priest said softly. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. "What does that mean?" The priest gestured toward the stained glass windows. Ethan followed his gaze. The snow outside was gone. The trees were bare, black silhouettes against a gray sky. The cemetery beyond the church was visible now, and every gravestone bore the same date. December 25th. Different years. All Christmas Day. Ethan stumbled back. "This is a joke," he whispered. "This isn't real." The congregation began to sing again, louder this time. The hymn rose into something else, a chant. The woman beside him grasped his arm. Her fingers were icy. "We come back every Christmas," she whispered. "This is where we rest." The priest returned to the altar. "One of us must stay," he said calmly, "to keep the service complete." The door slammed shut. The candles flared violently. Ethan ran. He bolted for the entrance, shoving past unmoving bodies, his hand slipping against the door handle. It wouldn't budge. The singing grew deafening. Hands grabbed him from all sides, cold, desperate, pleading. "Please," voices whispered, "don't leave us incomplete." The priest's voice cut through the noise. "Someone must take the empty place." Ethan screamed as the lights went out. The storm howled again. When the town found his car the next morning, it was half buried in snow, untouched since the night before. The church on Frost Mill Road stood dark and abandoned. No candles, no footprints, no signs of a service. But every Christmas Eve, locals swear they can hear singing drifting through the trees. And if you look closely through the windows, there is always one pew near the back that wasn't occupied the year before. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. The call came on December 12th at exactly 2:14 a.m. Sarah Whitman was already awake. She always was on this date. Every year since her brother died, sleep abandoned her hours before the time arrived. She sat alone on the edge of her bed in her small apartment, the only light coming from a dim bedside lamp and the glow of falling snow outside the window. Her phone lay face up on the nightstand. She watched the screen like it was a ticking bomb. 2:12 a.m. 2:13 a.m. The wind outside slammed into the building, rattling the windows hard enough to make the glass vibrate. Snow whipped sideways under the streetlights, piling against parked cars and fire hydrants. At 2:14 a.m., the phone lit up instantly. Incoming call, Mark. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Mark had been dead for 7 years. The first year it happened, she thought it was a cruel prank. The police traced the call and found nothing. No signal, no tower, no origin. She changed her number after the second year. After the third year, she stopped answering completely. But tonight felt different. The phone didn't just ring. It vibrated violently, buzzing against the nightstand like it wanted to escape. The room felt colder. Sarah could see her breath. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone. The caller ID flickered slightly, the letters in Mark's name stretching and snapping back into place. She should have let it ring. Instead, she answered. "Hello?" Her voice cracked. At first, there was only static, then breathing. Slow, uneven, wet and strained, the kind of breathing someone makes when the cold is already inside their lungs. Sarah swallowed hard. "Mark?" The breathing hitched. A faint crackling sound followed, like ice shifting beneath weight. "Sarah," a voice whispered. It was his voice, not clean, not alive, but undeniably Mark's. Tears welled in her eyes. "Where are you, Mark? Where are you?" Static surged, then faded. "I tried to get home," he said. Each word sounded dragged out like it had to be pulled through frozen air. "I knocked, but no one opened the door." Sarah's stomach dropped. That night 7 years ago, she remembered it perfectly. The storm, the pounding on the door, her mother screaming not to open it, the fear, the silence afterward. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "I didn't know it was you. I thought—" "Don't go outside," Mark interrupted suddenly. His voice sharpened with urgency. "Whatever you hear, don't open the door." The lights in the apartment flickered. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "Mark, what's happening?" Another sound filtered through the call. Footsteps. Crunching slowly through deep snow. Heavy. Deliberate. Too close. Mark's breathing quickened. "He followed me. He's been waiting." "Who?" Sarah whispered. The footsteps stopped. A low sound replaced them. Not a voice. Not an animal. Something breathing through its nose. "Close." "So cold," Mark whispered. "He learned my name." The phone crackled violently. The sound distorted, stretching, warping. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. "Mark, listen to me. Stay where you are. I'm calling the police." "No," Mark said quickly. "It's already inside." The call cut off. The apartment fell silent. Then, knock, knock, knock. 3 slow knocks on her front door. Sarah froze. The sound didn't echo like a normal knock. It felt heavy, dampened, as if the door itself were swallowing the noise. Her phone vibrated again. "Incoming call unknown." She didn't touch it. The call answered itself. A new voice filled the room. Deeper, slower, layered with something underneath it. "You ignored him." The doorknob turned slightly. Ice began forming along the metal, spreading outward across the doorframe in thin white veins. Sarah backed away, her feet sliding on the cold floor. "Go away," she whispered. "Please." The voice chuckled softly. "He waited for you, now it's my turn." A shadow slid beneath the door, stretching unnaturally long across the hallway floor. Sarah ran. She locked herself inside the bedroom closet, pulling coats down over her body, pressing her hand over her mouth to stop herself from screaming. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, screen lighting up the darkness. "Incoming call, Mark." She didn't answer. Outside the closet, footsteps moved slowly across the apartment. Not walking, dragging. Something sniffed the air. A wet sound passed close to the door. Then Mark's voice again, this time from the hallway, not the phone. "Sarah, don't listen to it." A pause. Then another voice mimicking his tone perfectly. "Sarah, open the door." The closet door handle twitched. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut. Minutes passed. Then silence. The front door opened. Closed. Footsteps faded into the storm. When police arrived at sunrise, they found the apartment door covered in frost from the inside. On the wood, written in melting ice, were 4 words. 2:14, you answered. Sarah changed her number again. It didn't matter. Every December 12th at 2:14 a.m., her phone still rings. Sometimes from Mark, sometimes from unknown, and sometimes both at once. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. The call came in just after midnight on Christmas Eve. Dispatcher logs would later show it lasted only 12 seconds. No voice, no words, just breathing. Mark Ellison was the only officer on duty in the town that night. A place so small it barely needed a police station, especially during the holidays. Most residents were home, roads buried under fresh snow, lights glowing warmly behind curtains. The call came from a landline address on Cedar Row, an address that shouldn't have been active. Mark frowned at the screen. Cedar Row had been condemned years ago after a fire wiped out half the houses. Utilities were cut, no phone lines, no power. Yet the call kept replaying in his headset, slow, uneven breathing. Like someone struggling to keep warm. He grabbed his coat and keys. It was probably a prank. Kids got bored on Christmas Eve, but something about the sound stuck with him. Not panicked, not frantic, just tired. The drive took less than 10 minutes. Cedar Row sat at the edge of town, swallowed by snowdrifts and darkness. Only one house still stood mostly intact, number 14. The rest were blackened frames and collapsed roofs buried under white. Mark parked and stepped out. The cold hit him immediately, sharp enough to sting his lungs. His breath fogged thick in the air. The house loomed ahead, dark, silent. Except for one thing. The porch light was on. A warm yellow glow spilled onto the snow-covered steps. Mark's stomach tightened. He climbed the porch slowly, boots crunching loudly in the silence. The door was closed. No footprints, not even his own, showed clearly. The snow looked untouched. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. The porch light flickered. Then the door creaked open on its own. Warm air drifted out, carrying the faint smell of pine and smoke. Mark drew his flashlight and stepped inside. The living room looked frozen in time. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, fully decorated. Tinsel, ornaments, a star on top. Presents neatly wrapped beneath it, untouched. A fireplace sat cold and dark, stockings hanging above it with names stitched in faded thread. Ella Thomas. Mark recognized the names immediately. The Turner family. They died in the Cedar Row fire, parents and 2 kids, Christmas Eve, 10 years ago. Mark swallowed hard and moved deeper into the house. The temperature dropped with every step. The hallway was darker, narrower than it should have been. At the end, a bedroom door stood open. Breathing came from inside. Mark stepped closer. Inside the room sat an old rotary phone on a small table. The receiver was off the hook. Breathing poured from it, shallow, wet, exhausted. Mark whispered, "Hello?" The breathing stopped. The phone clicked, then rang. Mark stared as the dial spun on its own. He answered. A child's voice whispered, barely audible, "Dad?" Mark's heart slammed against his ribs. "I'm not your father," he said quietly. "Who's there?" A pause. Then another voice joined the line, deeper, weaker. "It's cold." The lights flickered. Mark turned slowly. The room was no longer empty. Two small figures stood near the bed. Children, pale, barefoot. Their pajamas were scorched at the edges, fabric blackened like it had been burned once, and never cleaned. Behind them stood a taller shape. A man. His face was shadowed, skin cracked and dark, eyes reflecting firelight that didn't exist anymore. "You said you'd be back," the man said. Mark backed toward the door, heart pounding. "I don't know you." The man stepped forward. We waited. The walls began to darken, black marks spreading outward like burn scars. The smell of smoke thickened, heavy and choking. Heat rushed in waves, followed by freezing cold. The Christmas tree lights flickered violently. One of the children looked up at Mark. "You came this year," she said. "You never come." Mark turned and ran. The hallway stretched impossibly long, the floorboards groaning beneath his feet. Flames licked along the walls without heat, shadows crawling faster than the fire itself. He burst through the front door and fell into the snow. The house behind him was dark again. No porch light, no footprints, no sound. Mark sat there shaking until dawn. When investigators returned later that morning, number 14 Cedar Row was exactly as it had always been. Boarded up, collapsed in places, filled with ash and rot. No Christmas tree, no phone, no signs of entry, but the dispatcher log remained. A call received at 12:03 a.m., 12 seconds long, recorded breathing, and a final whisper that no one noticed until weeks later, buried beneath static. "We're still here." Every Christmas Eve since, the station phone rings once just after midnight. Mark never answers, but the breathing always sounds closer than the year before. You've just crossed the boundary between reality and the unknown. If you felt the fear tonight, make sure to subscribe before you leave, because on this channel every story is just the beginning. New nightmares arrive every few nights, each one darker than the last. Until then, keep your lights low, your doors locked, and your mind open. You are now part of the FearBound family.